These speeches, Mr Chair, and I guess we'll listen to a few more yet to go.
Phil Twyford. I've just called Phil Twyford.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I'm not going to waste any time in this call responding to that mumbling mediocrity from the chair of the Select Committee. I want to directly address the claim that Nick Smith has made that this bill represents somehow an attempt to address Auckland's housing crisis. This is the Minister who has spectacularly failed to build any houses. 2 years ago, he promised 500 hectares of Crown land would be used and 10,000 houses. And I think that promise that he made is somehow some kind of inspiration for this bill that would take 11 hectares of prized public parkland and turn it over into housing development. This is the Minister who promised 39,000 houses in the special housing areas and has seen 3 years later only 2,000 houses built. This is the government that has presided over a shortfall of 40,000 houses in Auckland. But they have the gall to come to this House and pretend that taking public parkland to build 300 houses is some kind of credible solution to the housing crisis. Well, it's not. It's not a solution, and it's not a solution for a community that is about to get 20,000 extra people living in it, thanks to the intensification that's going to be taking place as part of the Tamaki regeneration. An extra 20,000 people. Now, where are the kids going to play in that community where Nick Smith has sold off 1/3 of one of the most precious expanses of open waterfront urban parkland in the middle of a city that is going to get an extra 1 million people in the next generation? Many of those people will be living in high and medium density housing. They need open spaces. This is it's the height of stupidity, of short-sighted, narrow vision from the Minister from Nelson, who thinks it's okay to tell Aucklanders that houses should be built on their parkland. This is not a credible response to the Auckland housing crisis that is built up on this government's watch. This is Nick Smith thinking that he's being clever. He thinks that he's making a point. He thinks that he's making a point that Michael Wood and I call for houses to be built in Auckland, and yet we oppose his madcap scheme to turn precious parkland into housing. He thinks that's clever, that he's making some kind of political point. It's not. It's just sheer stupidity, Mr Chairman. And one of the things that really concerns me about this bill is that we need lots of urban redevelopment in Auckland. We need investment in communities like GI and Tamaki. We need more warm, dry homes. We need better parks and open spaces. We need a better built environment for communities like GI that frankly have been neglected. They've suffered from underinvestment in their houses, their parks, their town centre, their transport infrastructure. But this bill's not doing them any favour. In fact, it's the historic neglect of GI which meant that their parkland has not been properly looked after for decades. But that's no excuse to take it away. That's not a reason to take away their parkland, because this generation needs that parkland and future generations need that parkland. It's so incredibly short-sighted. But when the government does what it's doing with this bill, when it rides roughshod over local communities, when it takes away parkland but gives nothing in return, all that does is that it creates cynicism and resentment. It divides the community. It creates cynicism and resentment against a government that won't invest in their community. It just takes things away. And we need more good quality redevelopment in Auckland. The danger with a bill like this is that it takes away the public's willingness to go along with redevelopment. We need development by a government that will take the community with it, that will give them more than they take away, But that's the opposite of what this government's doing. They are damaging the social licence for government to do urban renewal and urban development, and, sir, that is a dangerous thing.
Mr Chair.
Barbara
Mr
Kuriga.
Chair. Mr Chair.
I've called Barbara Kuriga.
I move that the question be now put.
Mr Chairman. Mr Chairman.
I'm going to hear from Penny Hanare.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity. Look, I want to draw the House's